Three, two, one. And we are live with Straight Talk Live. Welcome back, everyone. Excited to have you with us today. My name is Rick Snyder, one of your co-hosts for this non-for-profit show dedicated to having the most impactful conversations that we need to be having right now on the planet. And so you're a big part of that. We're going to even ask you right now, please send in your questions. We want your engagement. Even if you're seeing this replay later, feel free to add your comments in the section below. We want to answer your questions and really build community and inspire the deeper conversations we need to be having in so many corners of the planet right now. So with that, I am the CEO of Invisible Edge, the author of Decisive Intuition, and the head of culture for Refound. And I'm also joined by our fellow amazing co-host, Af Malhotra. Af, take it away.
Thank you, Rick. Good afternoon, good morning, maybe good evening for our audiences that have joined in from other parts of the world. Very excited once again to be on this fantastic show. I'm Af Malhotra, of course, the co-founder of Growth Enabler and the co-creator of Straight Talk Live. Today's show is especially relevant to all of us, and I think will be quite inspiring for a lot of reasons, because we have David Germain on the show, who is a great guy. He's a great guy. He's a fantastic leader. And I got connected with him recently, and I spent about 45 minutes talking to him. And I have to say, I came off that conversation not just feeling thankful and grateful for having met him, but also I had a sort of renewed sense of energy and a feeling of almost contentment around the fact that we've done Straight Talk Live. We've set up this not-for-profit. And one of the things that both Rick and I have talked about is every time we do one of these shows, for all of you listening, it's very important that we have a practical or a pragmatic takeaway. Because we have these phenomenal speakers and brilliant minds from around the world who are sharing wisdom and their personal stories. And it's only justified and the right thing for us to do here, which is to really spend a little bit of time at the end of the show to summarize, either with the guest, in this case David, to tell us what we should do differently or do more of or do less of, perhaps, on the back of the 60-minute conversation we're going to have. So without further ado, it's an incredible honor to have David on the show. So Rick, I'll let you do the honors, and in traditional fashion, let's crack on.
Excellent. So I'm very excited about this topic. I know so many people are looking at, we need new leadership models. The old ones are broken. How do we need to reassess and pivot in this day, especially with the pandemic, with social unrest, with so many deep topics that we're having to confront and question about ourselves, about our identity, about our sense of belonging, my tribe, my country, my nation, my planet. We're really having to really be confronted in these critical ways to look at how do we redefine our relationships, especially from one of extraction to one of generativity. How do we move from profit only to real prosperity? What does that really mean? That's what we're going to be digging in deeply today. So without further ado, I want to introduce our special guest, David Germain. David, welcome to the show.
Rick, Af, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to your audience. I think Af started off, please.
Yeah, could you just share with our audience just a brief bio about you, where you come from, your background, for those who might not know who you are at this point?
Yeah, I'm sure no one knows who I am, so that's probably a good starting point.
Oh, that's not true, David.
We've got fans. We've got fans here.
You've got fans, David.
The only fans I've got sitting in this house, and they're 3 boys, and 2 dogs, and every now and then my wife's a fan, but that's about it. But no, look, I'm David Germain. Look, I sit in financial services. I'm a technologist. I deal with digital transformation, working with organizations on how they improve performance across the business and for their customers and for their shareholders. So it's that traditional type of stuff that you see many people like me do. I think in terms of my story, it's an interesting one. So my parents came to the UK 1956, 57. My dad came to the UK post-Windrush, so Second World War, and he was invited here by Her Majesty to help rebuild the UK. And my dad came from a small island called Dominica in the Windrush Islands. So it's about 70 odd thousand population, very small. And if you walk around the island long enough, you'll probably see someone that looks a little bit like you, and then question how does, what happened there, right? So small island, fishing village, no real career prospects. You pretty much bring up your family, you work, and a very religious environment, very Catholic religious environment. When he came to this country, he had zero education. Couldn't read or write. In fact, he went through his whole life not being able to read or write. My dad was a frustrated man. He aspired to wanting to do great things, but what held him back was confidence and courage. What also held him back was the time, right? Pushing yourself, creating opportunities that weren't there. The prejudice that we had in the country at the time was very difficult for people that was coming into the country. And we've all seen many documentaries about that. And I think that burdened my dad. I think rather than breaking out from society, he lived with that society. And that really, for his whole life that I knew him, he was always a frustrated man. But some of the positives that came out of that for him was he had three beautiful kids from his perspective, two girls and a boy. I was the youngest. He managed to earn enough money to fly my mum and at the time his eldest daughter over to the country. I think it took him 4 years to be able to afford the flights to get them into the country. Wow. And like most ethnic individuals at that time, the shock and awe of working in the UK was bizarre, right? It was cold. People weren't at that time particularly open and generous with their time. Living conditions were completely different. You're talking about the sun where water was warm every day. He went from warm water to cold showers, right? He went from an open environment, where it was third world, but it was very open and everyone was very generous, to being in an environment where your room, your bed, your toilet, your kitchen was all in one room, right? And actually staying out of this, walking the roads after dark wasn't necessarily the right thing to do in the UK at that point in time. So the cultural change for my dad and my parents coming here was bizarre. I think the education system that they didn't go through really held them back. And for them, it was about ensuring it didn't hold their kids back. And although they didn't really understand what to do with us in terms of education, I was really fortunate. And this is where my childhood was one of hard parenting, Catholicism, Caribbean controls. And if I say that to your audience and you've got some Afro-Caribbeans in your audience, they'll know exactly what I mean. Couldn't go out, stay at, parents wanted to, if they couldn't see you, there was a problem, right? If you were naughty, the broomstick was normally what you get used, right? You ate Caribbean food every day. That was the only menu that was on the dish. You watched what your parents watched in terms of TV, right? Your whole life environment growing up was controlled, and you lived in what I would call a fair culture, right? Everything was scary to a Caribbean person at that point in time. Leaving the house, staying out late, going anywhere you shouldn't was always carrying some kind of fair culture. And I can see Ab smiling, so he sort of get it, right? You weren't allowed to do a lot. You were so restrictive. So for me, the only thing I could do growing up was a couple of things. Go church, right? Education. I went to a very good school. I was very fortunate I got into a very good school. And my life was dictated around my school experience growing up. And if that was a negative school experience for me, I'm sure I wouldn't have gone on and achieved anything near where I am today. It was an extremely positive experience for me. And it was 1,500 boys. The year I joined was 86 or 87. And ethnic minorities were still new to that particular school coming in. So I think the population of ethnic minorities, including BAME individuals, was less than 3% at the time. So my hair looked different, and I had a huge afro back then, right? How I smelled was different. Everything about me was different. And I just remember having school dinners, and it was just like foreign food to me, right? Because I was at that point, I grew up in a Caribbean culture where it was all rice and peas, chicken, all that sort of stuff. So having different types of food put in front of me was like, oh my God, apple pie, what the hell is that, right? Didn't know what apple pie was until I was 11 years old. Didn't have my first McDonald's until I was like 15 years old or something crazy, right? So everything I experienced was for me coming out of my comfort zone. But what my parents didn't appreciate was I was building up resilience I was learning and getting a better understanding of different cultures, different people. And I had a group of friends who were really, really open and really helpful to me. And I had a set of teachers that could see a kid that just wanted to learn, right? And I preferred to be in the school environment than at home, because my home environment, we didn't have a lot of money. We were council kids. There was never anything in the house. So being in the library, being in school, being in after school clubs, for me growing up was much better for me than being at home. Not that I didn't love my parents, because I loved them immensely, but there was no resources. There was nothing in that environment for me. So I was in every club. I was, it didn't matter what the club was, whether I liked it or not, I would find a way of joining that club, right? So that whole educational system was fantastic. The problem I had was when I was coming home, because my parents had no view on education, never really went to parent-teacher evenings, all that sort of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
By the time I got to 15, 16, my dad had a view which was, you need to go and work, right? And my dad was a builder. He was a construction guy, and he was a low-level builder. So he wasn't even doing anything design or foreman. He was literally the guy they gave the worst job to on a daily basis, right? And it was, they had me when they were 47 and 40, right?
Yeah.
He was an older guy who was still doing heavy physical labor. And growing up, being your parents, your mum worked 5 cleaning jobs, your dad, do cleaning jobs as well, and being a builder during the day. He was a heavy smoker, because at the time he came from that environment where, he grew up in an environment where smoking was good, right? If we all remember, back in the 50s, 60s, 40s, 50s, 60s, in fact, you were told to smoke.
It
right?
was like
Smoking
chic and fashionable. Yep.
That's right? And it was, you were told, you go to the doctors, you've got a cough, you need to smoke 20 more cigarettes, that'll clear your cough for you, right? so the addiction, right? The addiction of cigarettes, the addiction of cigarettes isn't easy for someone in their, in 1990 to all of a sudden say to my dad, who's been smoking since he was 15 years old, you need to stop, Mr. Jermaine. It's too late by then, right?
And really quickly, my grandfather was told by the doctor, "Oh, cigarettes are not so good for you. Move to cigars. Go to cigars; they're much better." But from the doctor itself. So back in the day, it was a different mentality. Yeah.
There's a story. It's just inspired by your story. So back in India, there's this. So a lot of the sort of construction workers, the people who are, the rich-poor divide is massive, right? Of course, in India, it has been for a long time. So the guys on the street, mostly sort of the older gentlemen, they used to smoke this thing. It was not cigarettes. It was called a beedi, right? And you might remember this from your days in Nepal or India, Rick. And it stinks and it's awful. But, when you spoke to them, you said, well, why don't you smoke a cigarette? They're like, that's horrible. That's not good for you. We smoke this stuff. This is pure. It's really good for you. We were